none of us is perfect. None of these stories is perfect. And God allows us to see male and female characters all through the Bible who are flawed, but he still uses them and they still wind up in the lineage of Christ, many of them. And they're critical to, his overall story of care and love and working through the good and the bad. And so I found so much encouragement in studying these stories, learning way more than I thought I knew about these women. And then seeing how God had worked and that, listen, problems from thousands of years ago were very 2020, 21, 22, very modern and relevant, whether it's, disease and health struggles, infertility, family meltdowns, poverty, all of those things show up in our life and our communities now. And I was struck by just how universal the experiences were of these women all those years ago. I think very relatable for now. My name is Shannon Bream. You may know me from Fox News, where I anchor Fox News at night, and I am the chief legal correspondent. But I like to tell people I'm a sinner saved by grace, a daughter of the King, ever grateful for his mercy, which is new every day. And I am a native Floridian, now living in the DC area, dealing with politics and law and all the news of the day.
I heard that someone in the industry told you you would never be in broadcasting or be good at it. Is that right?
Yeah. I was a lawyer first, and I started to dabble in reporting and working at my local TV station as an intern. And, somewhere along the line, I convinced them to put me on the air. And that first boss took a big chance on me, but I had no, communications or broadcasting experience. So I hadn't studied those classes. Like, folks who come through and spend 4 years studying that are way ahead of me and were much better at this job. And I just kind of jumped in and learned sink or swim. And, a few months into that first job, mostly doing behind the scenes stuff, working the prompter and writing for other anchors and all of that, I did start reporting some. And then my boss and his boss left. There was a big management change. And the new boss who came in gave me a couple weeks, and then he called me in on a Friday. And I always say, and I like to share this with college kids, especially, like, it feels terrible at the time. It is not the end of your world. But the head of HR was sitting there, and I thought, I'm getting a promotion. And that's not what's happening. If the head of HR is sitting there, you're not getting promoted. And he told me he was going to let me go, but it could have been painful just in that respect. But he did give me sort of a speech about, you're the worst person I've ever seen on television. You're not cut out for this business. You're never going to make it. And I really hope you're a better lawyer than you are a reporter, because you need to go back to doing that. So that was a cold, hard slap of reality in my face. But I can see it now in retrospect, as painful as it was at the time, as part of God's plan. And I needed to get better and I needed to figure out what I was doing. And so it really was a gut check for me. Am I going to follow this passion that I think God has placed into my life for a reason? Or am I going to give up and say, he's right, I'm terrible, I'll never get better? So I actually am thankful. As much as I hated it at the moment, it taught me humility, and also that your job's never going to love you back. You can have a passion and a vocation if God gives you one outside the home, but that doesn't mean we can let it be all consuming.
Oh, that speaks to so many people, just hearing that story, because we need to realize everyone is going to be criticized at some time. And so we have to go to the Lord, like you're saying, and walk through it and find the ways we can improve. That's so good. Shannon, also, one of the things that I think is interesting is you did go into this career super successful in broadcasting in spite of what that person told you. But now you walk through historic events and take other people, the nation, with you through things that are going to affect the essence of their lives. How do you, deal with the weight and manage that?
I feel like for the first 15 years or so of my career, I was really able to compartmentalize pretty well. I mean, it's hard to cover stories where you're on the scene of a hurricane and or storm or something that's happened and people have lost everything and you just see the utter devastation. Especially if children are involved in stories, you're covering crime. I mean, there's so many difficult things, but I felt like for the most part, I was able to do my job. It's my it is my job as a news professional not to show my opinion, not to show my emotion. And I've always been able to do that pretty well. COVID, I think, changed everything because it was such an overwhelming wave of anxiety, of fear, of bad news, one after the other, of thinking that we were getting better and realizing the worst was actually still to come. I mean, it was just a real struggle. And when you're not part of the story, I think it's easy to shut it down when you go home, but everybody was part of the COVID story. Everybody had an experience with it, whether it was feeling isolated, whether it was getting sick yourself, or losing a loved one, or losing a job, or figuring out how to manage your kids' remote learning. I mean, there wasn't anybody who wasn't affected by COVID. So that made reporting on these things every night a little trickier because I was emotional about some of the things that have gone on. So I really, it was a reset for me in ways that, I had to make sure that when I get up in the morning, I don't look at my phone first thing. I can't because I'm not equipped to deal with what's waiting there for me. I've got to be in the Word and in prayer. For me, I like journaling too. And so it really gave me a good reset to say it's easy sometimes to jump out of bed and be busy and run on to the next thing. All of us have demands with kids and career and home and everything else. But for me, on those mornings, I just realized I have to do that preset so I can deal with whatever comes the rest of the day. And then we had, rioting and people dealing with the pain of racial divisions and loss there. As you and I are talking right now, Russia and Ukraine, Russia has declared war on these innocent people now, that more than 1 million refugees. So it's hard to watch and cover these stories every night, but it makes me only grow closer to the Lord, as you said earlier, as I think difficult times do. And it reminds me to pray for these people. It also gives me perspective that if I'm having a bad day and I've messed things up, the Lord has me in his hands, but there are also people around the world who desperately need us to be praying and interceding for them too.
Yes, yes. And we just pray that people will turn to him and feel his comfort at all times.
Mhm.
And I hear what, what you're saying for sure. What led to doing the show and the book Women of the Bible Speak?
Fox came to me a couple years ago and said, "We're thinking about doing a book in this space. We want it to be about women. We want it to be centered on the Bible. Is that something you'd be interested in doing?" And I always say, normally I got to pray about it. I need to talk to my husband. But on that phone call, was like, yes, I'll do it. I just felt like the Lord had brought this to me and put this in my lap. And I was really encouraged. So the book was written, the first one, during the worst of COVID. And so for me, it was a great encouragement to go through these stories that I knew growing up in church and having the little flannel graphs and the Bible stories in the Sunday school. I knew about Queen Esther, and I knew, of course, about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and so many of these women. But as we started to put the concepts together about who we would include in the book, and as it came together, I loved that. I really fought for Rahab to get in there, the prostitute, because I thought, she's in the lineage of Christ. And I want people to see that none of us is perfect. None of these stories is perfect. And God allows us to see male and female characters all through the Bible who are flawed, but he still uses them and they still wind up in the lineage of Christ, many of them. And they're critical to, his overall story of care and love and working through the good and the bad. And so I found so much encouragement in studying these stories, learning way more than I thought I knew about these women, and then seeing how God had worked. And that, listen, problems from thousands of years ago were very 2020, 21, 22, very modern and relevant, whether it's disease and health struggles, infertility, family meltdowns, poverty. All of those things show up in our life and our communities now. And I was struck by just how universal the experiences were of these women all those years ago. I think very relatable for now.
How did the show and book resonate with the viewers and readers?
I think we were all stunned at how well received it was. I had so much fun. It was such a blessing doing it and putting it together. But we found people were hungry for this. I think some people maybe think of Christianity as something that where women are kind of bit players or footnotes or, not the stars of the show. God's always the star of the show. But clearly there were stories through the Bible where he had women as his instruments. There were women all through the Old Testament. And in the New Testament as well, we see where Christ broke the norms of the time, spent time with these women. They were part of his ministry. He went to people that were outcasts from society, often women, and completely redeemed them. He said, "I didn't come to condemn you. Turn from your sin." That's definitely part of this equation. But I came to give you grace and mercy and to save and redeem you. So listen, people, I guess, needed to hear that message. And some of them would say, I kind of knew these stories were in there, but there's some of these women I'd never heard of, or I didn't know the full breadth of their story. And it was really encouraging. So we included study questions, and I started to hear from people all over the place that they did it as a church Bible study or a book club with their friends or studied on their own. And so we had a beautiful, amazing response to it that I don't, like I said, I don't think any of us expected. So we decided to follow that up with Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak. And we look at some of the same women, but from a different angle, and a bunch of new women in this book as well.
And I think the first one is Jochebed, Moses's mother, which, like we're talking about, we can identify with these people and women in the Bible because they did suffer. I mean, Jochebed was a slave. Her parents were slaves. And she lived in a government that totally controlled her life. And then King Herod said, he's going to kill all the baby boys, which is her child. I know you covered Jochebed. What do you say about her and some of the other people in the Bible that you cover?
Well, what I love about Jochebed is, she, as you said, she's a slave. She's a slave woman, but she was determined and courageous and faithful. And with her daughter Miriam, the two of them protected baby Moses. I love that the scripture says that when Jochebed held him and saw him as a baby, she knew there was something divinely special about him. And I gotta think that gave her courage, that when that command came, like, hey, if this baby is a boy, he's going to be thrown in the Nile and die. What I find that I love so many different things in her story, but ironic that she actually saved him by putting him into the Nile in this little pitched, baby ark kind of that she made for him. She was brave. She hid him for 3 months and then said, all right, Lord, I'm trusting you with this baby. I'm going to launch him out into the Nile and see what happens. So Miriam, the daughter, the faithful, brave young woman, really just a girl at this point, she goes to watch. And we see as Pharaoh's daughter, of course, God couldn't have scripted this any better. Pharaoh's daughter sees the baby, hears him crying, and she has mercy. We're told that she had compassion towards him. So this is a slave child that her family is oppressing the Israelites, and yet she has, great compassion for this baby. Miriam steps up bravely and says, hey, I can help you if you want help with this baby. I can find a Hebrew woman to nurse him for you. And immediately, what a joyous thing that she runs home to Jochebed and says, oh my goodness, they're going to let us raise the baby, for a couple years in that time period. The weaning was probably 2 or 3 years. And then he's getting poured into with his mother, who's seen this divine destiny for him, not knowing exactly what it's going to be, but she pours into him all of God's truth and his goodness and the Hebrew ways before he then goes off to be raised by Pharaoh's daughter, essentially in the palace. And we know the rest of his story is so amazing. And Miriam is woven throughout that as well, as she and Moses and Aaron, their brother, are instrumental in releasing the people of Israel and fighting for their release with God at the helm from slavery into the promised land. And I think, gosh, Jochebed raised 3 all-stars, these kids, because clearly she was faithful and brave, which we're all called to do at some point.
Oh, yes, it really makes me realize that whatever we're going through, just like they did, call on the Lord and he will guide you day by day to be faithful and step forward when we need to. That's really good. Wasn't Rebecca another one that you're covering in the new book?
Yeah, and she kind of falls into this characterization of moms who didn't always make the best choices. She starts with a beautiful love story with Isaac. So after Abraham, his father, has sent off his most trusted, guy who's running the household and says, go find me a wife for Isaac. She's got to be of these certain criteria. And Isaac, is at home waiting. And the party goes off and they find Rebecca through obviously God's divine wisdom and guidance leading them to her. She fulfills all of these things and comes back. And from the start, they have a really good start to their love story. But what we find is that for a long time, they did not have children. They desperately wanted children. Then she becomes finally pregnant with twins who are warring in her womb. And she has the guy, she's told ahead of time prophecies about these babies and what will happen. And after they're born, we find that Isaac has a favorite, Rebecca has a favorite. So Jacob and Esau, these twin brothers, are divided from the very beginning. And Rebecca really takes steps that are very devious with respect to Jacob. She wants to favor her favorite son and make sure he gets all the blessings. And it makes you wonder if she didn't trust God's prophecy about what would happen with these boys. I think we all do this at sometimes, like, God, let me help you out here because clearly this is not going exactly according to plan. So let me step in with my judgment or my idea for how to make this work. So, Rebecca shows us a cautionary tale about what happens, and we see the devastation in their family when she goes on to deceive her own husband, trying to favor Jacob. But I think there's so much we can learn from that, in that we all have to be careful in the way that we love and parent and shepherd our kids, and the relationship we have with our spouse, and to not let our own pride or ego or ambition overpower what God may have planned for our kids when we substitute our own bad judgments for His perfect judgment.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And in that story, I've always been struck by the fact that because of how she ended up deceiving and the inheritance went to Jacob, and then he was forced to leave, she never saw him or any of his family members again. There are consequences when we don't fully trust God and step in with our own plans if they're not of His.
God is love, and love comes from God. In 1 John, the Bible tells us that God is not only all loving, but that He actually is love itself. The heart of the Parent Compass television show is to bring the transforming love of God to families everywhere. In every Parent Compass episode, true stories reveal family struggles and how their lives were radically changed by the love of God. Parent Compass, an award-winning television series, is completely funded by people like you. If you have been touched by God and you want to share God's love to others, would you please pass it on? Jesus tells us to go into all the world and to tell about Him. With your donation, you allow us to take this television show into many different nations and in many different languages, free of charge. And a portion of your donation goes to Parent Compass Outreach to feed starving children. Your gift does so much. To make your tax-deductible gift, go to parentcompass.tv/donate. That's parentcompass.tv/donate. And thank you for sending love and hope around the world.